getting ready for our next panel. This is a very interesting one. Adapting the Lord of the Rings to Magic the Gathering. It's not an easy job, but the team made an amazing effort and we got an amazing Lord of the Rings set. This panel is going to be composed by Mark Rosewater, head designer for Wizards of the Coast Magic the Gathering, Glenn Jones, who was the lead designer for this set of the Lord of the Rings. And to host this amazing panel, please give a warm welcome to Ladee Danger!
Hello! Thank you. Good afternoon, Barcelona. Thanks for joining us here. As Felipe said, we are going to take you on the journey of how we adapted Lord of the Rings for Magic the Gathering. It's probably one of my favorite IPs. I don't know if it's your favorite IP. Do we like Lord of the Rings here? Yeah. That's what I thought. All right, joining me today is lead set designer Glenn Jones, and also, give it up for Glenn. And somebody that needs no introduction, I'm sure you know him, it's Mark Rosewater. Thanks, guys. Okay. Thanks for joining me. Get settled. We're on for a wild ride.
Yeah.
So, what was the hardest thing, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure everybody's here for, this was the first full Universes Beyond set. How did that happen? Who was in charge, and how did we get there?
So when Aaron Forsyth first pitched the idea of a Universes Beyond, he sort of made a note about, at some point we'll do a full set, and he said, we want something like Lord of the Rings, because we wanted something that's pretty adjacent to Magic. So when we went to figure it out, we said, well, you know, it's a lot like Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings. And we were really happy that we talked with Middle-earth Enterprises, and they said we could do it. And so it was the very first project we worked on when the pandemic started.
Oh.
So it was the very first thing that started completely at home. We were all in our houses and stuff. So I was on the vision design team. Ben Hayes was the lead designer of that. And one of the big challenges of doing Universes Beyond is, if I'm working on a normal Magic set and something needs to change, we change it. Like, we go to the creative team, and when I was working on Innistrad, I needed werewolves in red, so I just went to the creative team and go, I need red werewolves, and they figured it out. But with Lord of the Rings, I mean, Middle Earth is Middle Earth. Tolkien made it long ago. It is what it is. So one of the challenges is we can't change it. We have to adapt to it. And so it wasn't, written to be a Magic set. It wasn't made to be a Magic set. So what we find with any license is that there's things that work great, and then there's areas of where there isn't really what you need.
Yeah.
For Lord of the Rings, there were two big areas that we had problems with. Number one is there's just not a lot of flying things in Lord of the Rings. There's some, but we need a lot of flying things. Normally in a normal Magic set, we get as many as 30 flying things, and so that was the first issue. The second issue was we color balanced for colors. When we make a world, we make sure that there's an equal part, white, blue, black, red, and green. But in this world, there was a lot of white and green things, there was a lot of black and red things, and there were some blue things, but blue was definitely, it wasn't super balanced. And so one of the things we did early on in vision design is, what could be blue? So we made a decision very early on, for example, to say, well, maybe the elves, besides being green, elves are always green, maybe the elves could be blue. So that was one of the things we did to try to match that. So a lot of doing, the early structure of design was just figuring out, how do we make things work that, that naturally might not be there, and, how do we adapt to that? And so that was the biggest challenge. It's just, what does it naturally have? So one of the things we did early on is we made what we call the knowledge pyramid. And what a knowledge pyramid is, it's a giant pyramid, and there's 3 sections. So the bottom section is, if you would all know this IP, or you all know Lord of the Rings, you're going to know this. You'll know the Fellowship, Gandalf, and there's things that if you know the IP at all, you're going to know it. The middle one is things that, okay, if maybe, you've read all the novels, you're a little more advanced, you know some of that stuff. And then the top is the deep cuts. Build a Pony, the things that, if you really, really know Lord of the Rings, you'll know this, but the average Lord of the Rings fan might not know it. And so we made giant lists, not just of the pyramid, we also made this giant list of everything that was in the book. Because as I said before, we needed to find flyers and such like that. So we had extensive lists of like, here's all the objects, here's all the characters, here's all the events. And we used the pyramid and we used the list to start fleshing out what we needed.
Amazing. Glenn, how is it working on this project?
Yeah, it was a dream come true in a lot of ways. I'd led a few things at Wizards at the time, and I'd primarily been working on Universes Beyond and Commander. This was after like The Walking Dead, Stranger Things, Street Fighter, which are all projects I had also led. So I was really psyched to get this one because this property was really important to me. I went straight from Nancy Drew to The Lord of the Rings as a child, so that was like 3rd grade, and had a very formative impact on my appreciation of literature and just ability to actually read. So that was really great. And getting to do the project and getting to work with other people who were also such huge fans of the franchise. Aaron Forsyth already mentioned, like, we went out and took a big swing very early on with Universes Beyond to go after this particular IP, and we were lucky to find awesome partners in Middle-earth Enterprises. They were really collaborative, had tons of great advice, and yeah, just overall, it was a great process from start to finish. It was a lengthy process, given we were working with a new IP. We have art approvals, and just a variety of things that go into like licensing properties versus just making up our own. But as you can see, yeah, I think it came out great, and I was really psyched about all the art treatments, all that we got to do, and the pyramid was one of many pieces of documentation that we created that were kind of like new ideas that have since gone on to influence other Universes Beyond sets. Mark mentioned like writing down everything in the book. Like, I personally went through the books like twice, just writing a checklist of every like thing in my head I could see, like, oh, that could be a card. Like, what would that look like? Because I knew we'd need that too eventually. And there are also moments you want to make sure that are there, right? Like, if you don't want to get to the end of your 200-something card set and be like, oh wait, like, we forgot to put this huge scene that like everyone knows, like, what we actually almost did, like one of our early Art Wave top lines, like we actually didn't have Gollum biting off Frodo's finger like in the set. And I caught it and was like, oh, we got to get that in, obviously. Like, that's a huge moment. And now it's a card in the set, as you all know, very aptly named. And yeah, that was the kind of thing that the checklist tried to protect us from. In Gollum's Bite's case, it actually failed. But we managed to catch it anyway through diligence. So that was the other thing I learned was, check, 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 check again. And then another example of something we made is I made a chart for Booster Asfan that I think we have here. Mark mentioned the color pie in Magic is designed like sets are very equally distributed. Obviously, Ravnica is a great example. But then we take Lord of the Rings. Tolkien did have his own color pie. It's 2 colors. It's good and evil. So we needed to figure out a way we could slice Tolkien's color pie to interact with ours in a way that made sense. So you can see here, this is actually, the Asfan is kind of a term we use internally for as you fan a booster pack, like what do you see? So this is kind of charting the presence of good and evil in the pack, because we wanted you to see both, right? Like, it's a story of good and evil. It's about a war, a conflict, and we mapped the colors by like how much good, how much evil does each have, and then we, wanted to make sure the booster opening experience kind of mirrored that, and also that it came through in draft. Like, this goes through to the limited environment as well, like the battles of black-red orcs versus red-white humans. Like, we wanted to feel like humans and orcs. We don't want it to feel like Boros versus Rakdos. Like, that's not the vibe, right? Like, we want to really tighten it in.
So I'm assuming on the pyramid scale, you're at the top?
Yes. Yeah. Quite at the top. If I wasn't before the set started, I certainly am now.
And what about you, Mark?
I'm more on the bottom. I mean, I've seen the movies, I've read the books. I mean, I definitely am familiar with it, but like, I could have told you who Bill the Pony was, so.
I would say I'm probably somewhere between the middle and the high end.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've seen the movies. I've been a big fan of Lord of the Rings as an art director, and seeing this whole set come together, it has been mind-blowing. It's so much love and care has been put into it that I have really high hopes for the future of Universe Beyond sets. How difficult was it as you were going through the pyramid and balancing the colors to find cards that you wanted or that you absolutely needed? I know you said you had your checklist, but were there any specific cards that you were like, I must do this, and how did you figure out?
Yeah. I mean, all of the legendary characters, like obvious examples, and we can touch on them in a little bit. As far as like events, I wanted to especially capture things that hadn't been expressed in other media expressions of the brand, right? Like, so we have the Battle of Bywater, where the Hobbits return to the Shire post-Ring to rescue it from Saruman, who has essentially become a mob boss of the Shire at that point in the story. We have that version of Saruman as Sharky. We wanted to make sure we captured like that piece of the story because it was a piece that we could give a whole new feel and bring to people who might not even be familiar with it, because it's pretty much mostly known from the books. So that was one of the ones that was really big. Another element of it was certainly Sauron. We'll touch on him more, but we wanted, like, what does Magic's Sauron feel like? Like, how do we express him? Like, how do we make him different from what other people might perceive him to be?
So I know the set's out, so we know there's different versions of everybody. How did we get that? How did we figure out which?
Yeah. So when we started, the very first draft we did, there was one of each character, and we quickly noticed the problem, which is if we made sort of uncommon versions of the character so that they showed up in limited, then we didn't have exciting sort of constructed versions. But if we made exciting constructed versions, then they weren't showing up in limited. And in fact, I think the very first draft we made them mostly rare, and then we had the draft and you just didn't see anybody that you knew, And that's when we decided, okay, we need to have more than one copy, at least of the major characters. So I think most of the Fellowship have at least 2 copies. There are a few characters that have 3 copies. And what we realized is because it's a story we're telling and the characters go through the story, we could pinpoint different moments. So this is this character, but from this point in the story. So like, we could see Gandalf or Frodo or whatever at different points. And one of the things we said really early on was where we could, we wanted different colors, meaning why do the same, like why express it the exact same way in all the cards? So it was kind of neat to have a mono blue version of Gandalf and a mono white version of Gandalf, and that different decks could play them in different ways. And so one of the conscious choices we made was we wanted things to show up in different forms. So there's different Gandalfs, but they're not all the same.
Yeah, Magic uses archetype a lot for character, right? Like Jace is blue. We all know that, right? But that's not to say Jace has never had moments of like irrationality or greed or community. Like Jace feels. He's a character. But we choose to express him as a blue archetype for Magic. But Lord of the Rings also characters. They have a range of colors and expressions, and in particular, as you note, like they have plots. Like they have story arcs that they go through and character changes. Unfortunately for us in Lord of the Rings, many of the character changes come with costume changes, which makes it really easy to kind of tell them apart as we change them from color to color. And so that was really our target, was which characters go through arcs where they kind of have the transformative experiences, and those were the ones we really tried to make sure we hit twice. Fortunately, they also are the most important characters in the work, and Gandalf, great example. We see him here. We wanted to start off with mono blue, like he's a wizard. That's just like really basic kind of experience for him, and at this point in his story, like he is his most blue. This is at the birthday party shortly before he actually leaves Frodo with the ring to go research what that thing might be, which takes some amount of time, and eventually he returns, and they start off with forming the Fellowship after their journey to Rivendell. And then Gandalf moving up to blue-red, like we wanted kind of battle Gandalf. Like that's a cool idea, right? Everyone loves the bridge scene. It's been depicted in tons of media. We wanted that to be like our Gandalf that feels very fighty, that feels very wizardy, that captures the spellcasting element. So we did that here. And then Gandalf the White, obviously we went ahead and shifted him to white for that one. And that one is much more of the Gandalf at the height of his powers, and we wanted to really kind of do some unique things that also communicated how he's built, bringing together all of these major characters and major artifacts, one in particular. And as you see across the cards also, we tried to weave sub-themes into the characters whenever we could. So Gandalf here has a flash sub-theme, and even the middle card, which doesn't have flash, revolves around instants and sorceries, which instants are quite good at instant speed, generally speaking. So we tried to do that with every character wherever we could find it. So Mary's cards like depict him attacking at uncommon and at red, white, rare. Very different cards, but still like that's what Mary's kind of about. Saruman's cards are about casting 2 spells, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I definitely think we can't continue talking about this without talking about our
Hobbits.
whole Hobbits.
Yeah, the Hobbits are, in many ways the heart of the story. They're the primary characters. These two were particular joys to work with because they're simple characters. So like they have great stories, defined starting points, defined end points, and we get to see them go through a really clear transformation where they're kind of bumbling, maybe even at times a little bit selfish or at least Shire centric, right? Like they're about the Shire in maybe a way that's reductive of what's going on with the rest of the world, but that's not how their story goes. Like they eventually each find community with other nations, which we see depicted here on these cards, and we wanted to depict in both cases that shift to selflessness. So these designs are about the characters they're working with in different ways. Pippin's very protective. The moment where he saves Faramir from the fire is one of his iconic scenes, so that's why we gave him a Mother of Runes type vibe. We wanted to communicate that. And then Merry, here charging into the Battle of Rohan, he's an instrumental figure in the defeat of the Witch King alongside Éowyn, so he has an ability that looks for another legend. And also the Barrow Blade he's carrying, not a lot of people know, top of the pyramid stuff, but the Barrow Blade itself is a part of the magic that allows Éowyn to defeat the Witch King. So that's also why we wanted to give him an equip bonus, that little nugget of extra for people who knew that it mattered that Merry had this sword. It wasn't just his bravery that was able to take down that foe.
It was definitely the combination of all of them.
Yeah.
I've gotten in many arguments about it. Mark, did the vision team have a vision initially going in of how the Hobbits would translate into the game?
I mean, I think the thing is for each of the, for the Hobbits, for the elves, there's some essence of what they were. One of the things we talked about early, and obviously Glenn continued, was the Hobbits need to be small, right? And the idea of the Hobbits connected to food was something that was very early on. One of the things you always want to do when you're adapting something is say, what does the game of Magic, what are the mechanics we can do that we can represent?
Yeah.
Size is something easily we can do. Food happened to be low-hanging fruit that we could do. So a lot of what we were trying to do early on was just keep them to certain colors and try to give them a certain feel. And then a lot of the early draft archetypes sort of came out of okay, the Hobbits are green and white, and there's a certain deck of Hobbits, and they're going to use food, and then elves were blue-green, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, as fun as it is talking about all the good characters, I think I'll be a little selfish here and bring up some of the, quote, bad characters.
Wait, can we talk Frodo first?
Okay. We can talk about it. We can talk
Before
about Frodo.
Before we get back, let's talk Frodo.
Yeah, one of the things Mark noted on size, we had to use a range of sizing for humanoid characters, which Magic sets often don't, right? Big cards tend to be larger animals, but we had a lot of humanoids. We did make a rule for Hobbits in the main set, which was that they needed to be 2 power or less if they're a halfling, except for Gollum. He gets to break the rules because of his unnatural association to the ring. And then moving on to Frodo here, who, as you see, fulfills the criteria of 2 power or less. We wanted to communicate, obviously, his story. I enjoyed both of these cards quite a bit. The Figure of Destiny design, that's Magic lingo for the execution we used on Frodo here. It was suggested in a meeting, and it just felt so instantly appropriate. And maybe even just because people would say the words Figure of Destiny. Frodo is a figure of destiny, in a way. That's a lot of what he's kind of about. Who else could have done this? Maybe Sam, but not a lot of other people could have pulled off this particular quest.
Yeah, the one thing that I enjoy is when we can find magic mechanics. So Frodo Sorensbane's a great example, which is you want to show him slowly corrupting, right? Obviously with the ring, and hybrid mana and off-color activate. We really were able to use a lot of tools of magic design to use sort of as paint to really show this thing off. Yeah. And I love this. I mean, the design to me is so cool because it really communicates something very subtly, but in a very magic way, which is neat.
I think it goes back to, as a player and also a fan of the IP, so much thought was put into it. As I'm playing, it feels like Frodo would absolutely do this. This makes sense. Or, different mechanics through the whole set. I'm like, this just makes sense. It's just correct. Speaking of correct,
okay,
I feel like we have to talk about the big bad guy.
Okay, let's talk bad guys.
Sauron,
the bad guy.
The baddest. So we have 2 Saurons in the set, which we debated actually pretty heavily because, Sauron's a huge figure, making him the rarest thing that shows up really infrequently. That's actually pretty cool. nobody really sees Sauron. If they did, that would be very bad for them. So we debated it, but we wound up deciding to go with it because he does have a costume change into a two-sided arc, sort of, which not a lot of people are even that familiar with, which is his role as the necromancer earlier on in the story, and he eventually then returns to Mordor and really kind of kicks things into high gear. So that was what we wanted to kind of show, a weaker Sauron, not really in full grasp of his powers, and then we really wanted that awesome Grixis-oriented Sauron, because he's a pretty Grixis fellow. A lot of bad guys turn out to be Grixis. That's just how it goes, sorry. But yeah, I really love this card. Someone, I don't remember who in a meeting, I feel actually kind of bad, because I'm sure that it's a point of pride for them, as it should be. The Ward sacrifice a legendary creature or legendary artifact. Like, as soon as someone said that in the line, I was like, yep, that's going on the card. Like, we're done with that one. Okay, let's figure out the rest of this thing. We wanted to mass orcs. Like, that's kind of a thing he's about. And of course, he cares about the ring. We want to do that too. So it was all really tricky. And one of the things that I liked about Sauron was also kind of winking at him missing a finger. So I used the number 4 a lot more often on cards that it featured Sauron, because it just made me laugh. Yeah.
Well, I think we have Sauron, but obviously the Nazgul came in. Mm-hmm. He's in charge of the whole thing. We don't see a lot of Shadowborn Apostle type cards coming out. How did we get to this?
Mm-hmm. Well, the funny thing is, it's the 7 dwarves, basically. So when we were making Eldraine, originally what I said to them was I wanted to have 7 dwarves. We'll have exactly, wouldn't this be awesome? We'll have exactly 7 dwarves. And what they said to me is that's too big of an ask. Like, it's a lot of constraint. You're using up a lot of space to have exactly 7 dwarf cards. So we came up with the idea of, well, what if we let you have a limit so that we get the word 7 in there, and that we could have 7 dwarves. And it worked really well, and people liked it. So when we're doing the Nazgul, we're like, hey, works for the 7 dwarves. And so we sort of had that technology. Obviously, there's 9 Nazgul, so like, we get. It's nice in that players really enjoy that you can have more than 4. You know, you're really restricted normally, or 1 in case of Commander. And so it was a nice, cool idea to have a singular card, but then they have multiples of them. Mm-hmm. And then, do you know when the multiple art idea came about?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's mine. I think it might have been mine. But yeah, I really loved that idea as well.
Yeah.
So as soon as we kind of had this 9 Nazgul in the set premise, it was kind of a decision for us, actually. We thought about not doing the 7 Dwarves approach just because, we do need flying creatures, and the Nazgul are some of the very few creatures that actually get to fly on the backs of fell beasts. But ultimately, yeah, we decided this was just the way to go. I'm very partial to Shadowborn Apostles myself. I just think they're awesome. And I wanted to try and design one, had some legs in Commander and was also interesting for draft because it's a fun quest to go on to collect these cards. And then collectability obviously leads us to the different arts. Having 9 different arts makes them really fun to collect and gives them a lot of identity, drives up the idea of the 9 as a really iconic number and a really core part of the game experience. And also, even just playing a game of Limited and seeing like 2 different Nazgul is cooler, right? Like it vibes a slightly different way, and that was awesome. And definitely a shout out to Mike Turian, who's our product architect, who certainly championed this idea. May have also been the person to come up with it, but either way, he had to do all the work of figuring out how to print 9x of an uncommon that then drops at the correct rate for draft and everything. So yeah, not easy.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I was going to ask if the number 9 played a part in any other design of the set.
I don't think in the main set, but there was a commander card that also cares about having 9 rates, which Ethan Fleischer designed.
Oh,
great card.
So good. I think we have to talk about the orcs and the amass mechanic. I'm a huge fan of the amass mechanic. I know it's controversial out there. It's good, I promise, and I feel like y'all made it better. How did you get from what the amass mechanic was previously to what we wanted now?
So what happened was we were making War of the Spark, and in War of the Spark, the Kobolas has a legion of undead zombies, right? And early on, we were like, okay, just make a lot of token creatures. But one of the problems is when you just make a lot of tokens, it gums up the board, and it makes you more defensive than offensive.
Yeah.
But what we wanted with the army was an offensive army, one army that you wanted to attack with. And so we came up with the idea of, well, how do we make a vertical army? Like, how do we make an army that... and so the amass mechanic sort of came out of that. Came out of like, okay, well, what if we make a singular thing, and then as you make more of it, it gets bigger rather than going wider. We really liked how it played. So one of the things we said in Universes Beyond is, look, whenever we can use mechanics that are, like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
If there's a really good mechanic, let's use that. Now, originally, a mass was tied to zombies.
Yep.
So, like, a mass just made a zombie army token. So we had to go to the rules team and say, well, could we make an orc army? Because obviously, they're not zombies. And then we had to change it so instead of mass orcs, but we were able to do that.
Yeah, the other element of it that I particularly liked is when you envision like the orc armies, like we can all see in our mind like that huge phalanx of orcs, right? And we can also see similarly that line of riding Rohan warriors coming towards them. And that's how it feels like in game, like the tall army against the wide human strategy. That was what really captured it for me and sold me. Like I never tried out a different mechanic for the orc army. It was always, once I got it from Vision, I was just like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's just figure out how to make it work and push it for the set.
Yeah.
It definitely felt like, based on the story, orcs are kind of disposable, so to speak.
They can be, yeah.
But and in this format, you're using them to do the thing and you're attacking, but they're also still kind of disposable because they are still a token.
Yeah, the more of them you get, the more valuable the token becomes. Like a mass 1 orc, like you're happy to throw that away, and there's lots of cards in the set to let you do that. But once you start getting up to like, that's a 3/3, that's a 4/4, it's like, okay, well now I've got like this orcish horde. People should be pretty scared. And also, I'm not going to throw it away.
Yeah.
The other thing on mass touch, which is really cool, is we like having riders on spells. Like, do a spell and then you have a little rider, and it lets you sort of put a creature as a rider, which is not easy to do.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, oh, well, I can, do this effect, and I slowly can increment my army. And so it's fun that you can draft a lot of those cards together, and as you're doing little things, you're slowly, your army's building over time.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure to attack with a 15-15 army, and I won. So we do have also goblins. How did the goblins fit in with the story of this? Obviously, we had goblins in Middle-earth, but how did we translate it to also balance with the goblins that we know and love in Magic?
Yeah. This is actually a pretty interesting topic because we debated whether to have goblins in the set at all. People, think of orcs as the primary baddies of Lord of the Rings. And for Tolkien, goblin, orc, like, it's all pretty interchangeable. He uses those words interchangeably in the books, similar to how he uses halfling and hobbit. Like, they essentially mean the same thing. So we debated, what to do. Ultimately, what really drove me wanting to do goblins in the set was people like goblins. Like, we're making a product for you guys. Like, we want to make sure that there are cards that go into the decks that you love that can get you into a deck that you might love. And goblins are just such a prolific type in Magic and just a really fun one. So we decided we wanted to do it, and we needed to come up with a logic for like what was a goblin versus an orc, so that it kind of held together sensibly in the set. So our logic wound up being that red creatures, mono red creatures, like those got to be goblins. If you had any black, if you were black, red, or black, you were an orc. And that was the line we decided to draw. Also, the red ones tend to like be the Moria themed cards as opposed to the like Isengard or Mordor themed cards. And there's not that many of them, but we wanted to make sure that we got them in the set and could depict them because it's just an iconic Magic creature type. And that's a good example of the kind of thing you have to weigh for Universes Beyond is, like, you are making game pieces. Like you want to capture the story, but not at the expense of creating like a really great experience for your players and a really exciting product to open and add to their decks.
And it's something we look for in all Universes Beyond is what magicness can we, where's the overlap with things that are just core Magic?
Yeah, like I said, it speaks to the authenticity of Magic and what it feels like to play Magic. And when I do pick up Universe Beyond product, it still feels like Magic every time I get to play it.
Yeah.
So I guess the book has tons of historical events and iconic events in it. How did you fit them all in with, the story spotlights are amazing. So how did you decide on the team which ones were going to make it?
It was a huge collaborative effort. The whole set was, but certainly like the liaison between design and art for the set was probably the tightest and most immersive that I've seen any other set go through in Magic. Like, I was meeting with them constantly. We had conversations all the time about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. So thanks to all of them. I would try and list all of their names, but I'd be super embarrassed about forgetting somebody, but you're all great, so thank you very much. The scene cards were a cool idea that we got from product architecture. I know we tried like the idea before in some other places we considered doing
well,
it.
Actually, the very first time we did them was in Unstable. We had contraptions in Unstable, and Dawn Mirren, who's the art director of Unstable, came up with the idea of what if it was one giant picture that we then made individual cards out of. And so that's the first place we did it. And it was awesome. And so we tried to apply it other places. So, it made sense here.
So we saw that it could be like structurally really appealing and eye-catching in Unstable. And then, we have iconic moments in a story to communicate. And it's like, well, we need something eye-catching. Like, I guess this might work. So we got that approach from architecture, and we wound up kind of scripting out really early on what were the moments that felt like both we could depict them as scenes, and also that we could get like the right scale and perspective to show a whole scene. Like it's kind of difficult. The taller you go, obviously, there's not a lot to do in the sky. We've already had that problem in design. We don't need it in art too. So we wanted to make sure we found moments that we could depict from angles that were favorable for creating the moments, and that were also just kind of telling the story. Like we wanted pieces from the start, pieces from the end. Like we didn't want it to all kind of gum up at one point. And we had the idea to start including the pre-release bundles and the actual bundle. And the pre-release bundle made great sense for Bilbo's birthday party. Like it kicks off the whole story, and so it's going to kick off the Lord of the Rings experience as well. I was really thrilled with that particular decision coming together. And then once we had the basics of the idea around it, was just figuring out how to keep each card like correct. Like if these things were flying in unison, which is one of the lessons we learned. Like maybe they need to be a little further apart. So if I, for example, had wanted to change Many Partings to be a totally different card, that's not going to really work out unless I have something I can slot easily into that spot. So once we kind of committed to what we needed each piece of the scene to be, we had to kind of work within that frame, which was an additional design constraint.
I mean, as an art director myself, this is mind-blowing. I mean, and as a collector, I play Magic, but I also collect it. It's art to me. And so to be able to see these full scenes that I love from these stories out on a playmat just in front of me is, I'm speechless. It's amazing to me. So I know we briefly touched on size. We talked about how you have the number 4 in, and we wanted to keep the halflings to the 2, like less than 2 power. How does the power and toughness translate throughout the whole set going forward?
Yeah, I think the Hobbit one was a fun constraint, and that one was pretty easy to work in because we didn't need to have 30 Hobbits in the set. We needed a relatively small number. We did want more than kind of you might feel. Like we wanted some common ones to just show you like life in the Shire, both pre and post Saruman's invasion. So we added a few more than you might expect for that reason. And within that space, they mostly just took up a lot of our small white creature slots, which we often would have spent on stuff like birds, which we didn't have very many of those anyway, or humans, and we had lots of humans. So humans as a whole are kind of sized up a little bit in the set relative to what they might be in most other Magic sets. Like one of our commons is a 5-cost 4/4 group of humans. Like we wouldn't usually do that in a Magic set. We've done it before sometimes, but it's a little less common. And then the Hobbits, obviously food, as soon as anyone said food, we wanted to make them all about that, and that was how we kind of tried to orient the limited archetype. One of the things I really love about the set is when you're drafting many of the archetypes, you can almost draft by art. Food is one of those decks where, if there's a Hobbit and or a delicious dinner in it, you can draft it. And that counts. I think it's fair to count Shelob and Smeagol as well. They eat in their own way for black-green, so you can have some fun with food that way too.
I definitely have had my fair share of fun with Shelob food. It has been very, very fun to play in Commander. Guarantee, if you can try it, please do. If your friends are mad, tell them I told you to do it. So I feel like we couldn't go any farther without talking about the ring. The ring plays such a huge part of the story with multiple characters in the Lord of the Rings. How did you decide that how it works, first of all, and how you were going to translate it into a Magic set?
There was a lot of debate around the ring. One of the other challenges of the Universes Beyond is that you're ultimately delivering on the expectations of the audience, right? Like Magic sets are often trying to surprise with this is something new, we're going to surprise you with our execution of it. Whereas Universes Beyond is, this is something old, we're going to surprise and excite you with our execution of it. So you got to pick your moments for surprise and pick your moments to kind of deliver the expectation. But the One Ring's so difficult because it's this incredibly powerful thing. A lot of different ideas about what that means in the context of the story, like what power even means in the story is kind of up for interesting debate, but we're not going to go there. I multiple times would send out design homework for people, and even opened it to departments outside of design, send me what you think the One Ring does. You get 45 totally different ideas for how to execute on the concept, and it's this is going to be tricky. So we tried a lot of them. We started off with an equipment, hey, you wear it, right? That makes sense. But equipment's fairly limiting for an object we want to make seem incredibly powerful, and we already had a lot of cool equipment in the set as well, with Endurial and Sting and things like that. And it was just ultimately we decided, no, we don't really want to go in that direction. We want to make it feel like you, the player, have the One Ring. That's a power fantasy that we can give you. And so from there we moved to okay, should it care about the ring tempts you, the mechanic? And we tried a lot of designs that did that, but it had some issues as well. One was the ring tempts you is kind of in the set as a limited fixing mechanic. It drives a lot of limited gameplay. It solves for the lack of flyers in its own way. So it's got a whole different purpose. And if you like it, that's great. If you don't, then we don't want to kind of tamp down your limited experience is bleeding onto the most awesome, what's supposed to be the most awesome mythic rare in the set. So we tried a variety of designs in that space, and then just wound up kind of leaving it behind and trying to make let's just try and build one of the coolest artifacts that you can control. And we wanted to make it really exciting, really powerful. And we iterated on it several times, and this version of the One Ring was actually, I think the One Ring was maybe one of the last cards in the set finalized, because we wanted to take such a level of diligence to ensuring it was executed on at a really high level and in a really exciting fashion. So I'm happy with how it came up. If you've been following the Pro Tour, they certainly seem pretty happy with the function of the One Ring. And altogether, I'm just really thrilled it came out as good as it did.
It's playing with it when I was drafting and with the whole team, I was just everybody had it. Everybody was using it to the best of its ability, and everybody's who can use it the best? And it's made the game interesting in a way that it keeps me engaged, and I'm really paying attention to where it's going, who has it. As far as vision, what did you think of the ring initially?
Well, we were more concerned with the mechanic per se than this. Vision is not concerned with singular cards as much as concerned with mechanics and themes. So let's talk a little bit about the ring tempts you.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so we knew going in, we mapped out things that we might want to make mechanics out of, and we knew the ring, it's in the title, right? It's pretty important. So our first inspiration, Dominaria originally had a large set and a small set. I think the code names were Soup and Salad. And Salad ended up turning into Core 2019, so it went away. But we had made a mechanic for it that we called Leadership. And so the way Leadership worked was, when you entered, you chose a leader, and then the leader, it granted the leader some ability. So the card would say, choose a leader if a leader gains flying, or choose the leader if a leader gains first strike.
Yeah.
And the idea is there only ever was one leader, but when you play a second card, you could change who the leader was. But then all the abilities were granted to the same creature. We had done a lot of stuff in the past, like Soul Bond and things. It got very complicated when different things granted different abilities and you couldn't follow the board. So leader was the idea that, well, there's just one singular thing to follow. So we ended up not doing it just because the set never got made. So early on, we were looking at, okay, what can we do? And we liked the idea of, what if we took the leader and applied it the ring bearer? We'll choose the ring bearer, and the ring bearer would get granted abilities. So that was the earliest incarnation of it. And then I believe, before we handed it off to set design, I think there was a token got made. There was an equipment token. And so the ring, you made a ring. In all versions, there was one of them. One person got it. We always kept the idea that there's a singular thing, because that's important to the story. And I think at handoff, it made an equipment. So I can continue the story from there.
Yeah, that's totally true. At handoff, it was an equipment, and it was pretty simple. I think it was provided ward and one other small
Skulk,
effect.
maybe?
No, we came up with Skulk and set design. I'd had some other evasive, similarly evasive ability.
Early on, we had Skulk at some point in Visions. Maybe it went away before you guys brought it back. But
two great teams, great ideas. Yeah. that makes total sense. And the issue we had with that execution was we also really wanted to care about legends, like legend matters, being like a theme in the set, because it's not all about the ring bearer. Like, there are huge swaths of story that take place with as the Fellowship splits up. Like, there's a reason the first book's called the Fellowship of the Ring, not the third book. So we wanted to have legendary matters in the set. It's a proven, really strong mechanic. We even considered historic for a bit, but we didn't feel like we had enough common artifacts to kind of support that. Most of the artifacts that you encounter in the world are incredibly mythic in nature. So we had a lot of crossover with cards that care about having a leader and cards that care about having a legend. That's really difficult to fit into mechanical space, and they also tended to share colors. Like, the cards that would care about the ring bearer and cards that would care about legends were also very similar. So we decided to kind of merge them all into one thing, with the ring bearer conferring legendary status via the mechanic. And that also does do a great job of telling the story of the Lord of the Rings. Like, Frodo is essentially, in some ways, an anonymous hobbit, raised up to legendary status by this inheritance and this quest that he has to go on. And now that happens in limited with, your random Rohirrim Lancer or whatever. He picks up the ring and now has a job to do. So there's also kind of like a what-if element that we get to play upon in the story that way. And they blended together pretty seamlessly from there. We still got to care about legends. We got to make as many as we wanted. I think we made like 75. Don't know how quick that record will be broken for number of legends in a Magic set. But yeah, that was one of the nice little bits of kismet that they kind of just merged together seamlessly, because it certainly could have been much more difficult to do. But yeah, I think I managed to actually overhaul the design file for that in like a night. Like, it wasn't hard at all.
So the Vision team was in charge of a lot of the mechanics. So was the Vision team also in charge of how this set was going to have relationships with other sets, in the sense of like, okay, we were going to do Commander, we're going to do, like, how did the Vision team play a part of that?
We didn't know in Vision design, like the idea that it's being modern, entered into modern, I don't even think it was decided during Vision. I think that happened during set design. Usually what happens early on is Vision design is more about just big picture strokes of like, how do we capture this? How do we capture that? A mass will be the army, and we have a ring mechanic to represent the ring. And like we talked about doing a mechanic for the Fellowship also, like making join the Fellowship, but we ended up not. It ended up being too similar to the ring, so we ended up not doing that. But yeah, a lot of most of what we did is like elves will be blue and things like that. I mean, I think. The set design team had to do a lot of the actually figuring out individual cards and archetypes. Like we used to say, Vision design is the architect building the blueprints, but set design has to actually build the house. Yeah,
I would even go so far as to say, like, you frame it up. Yeah, like you really get it kind of in shape, and you make sure that like we have the right pieces, like not just we don't have to go shopping, so to speak. Like, we have what we need laying around, which was great for this particular set. And yeah, the other mechanics from Vision, I largely pulled over pretty unchanged. Like, even the green-blue elves caring about Scry came from Vision, which was really satisfying. Green-blue, for those who haven't had to design a Magic set, green-blue can be a difficult archetype to find a really cohesive identity for in a set, and I felt really lucky that I had both elves and Scry. So I was like, okay, people definitely know how to draft green-blue. Like, that's one of the things that I can kind of just count on being a solid opportunity. And we really liked the blue elves too, so it gave us an opportunity to drive up like what is the bluest thing about elves, and to print some green Scry cards, which I'm always a fan of too.
So I'm going to ask perhaps a silly question. So there's been a lot of talk, at least with my play group. Are you supposed to take the perforated ring and put it on the ring bearer, or where does it go?
You can do whatever you want with it in a couple ways. So you can use it to track like the levels of the ring, which is what some people do with it. The original idea was, you would take it off and put it on the ring bearer, and that actually that spawned from a like really early consumer playtest we did with a group where we took the set and showed it to a few people externally. And one of the things I did was I just put a paper cut out ring in each of the boxes to see what they would do with it. I didn't tell them to do anything with it. And universally, pretty much everyone who found it in the box, some people didn't, would use it to mark the ring bearer. And when someone who didn't saw someone else do it, their immediate question was like, where did you get that? Like, I wish I had that. So we were like, okay, let's try and make this a piece of the game token that we eventually make that people can enjoy. And we also tucked it on the top, so you don't have to tear your card apart if you don't want to. You can just tuck it into the sleeve of your ring bearer or behind the card as you play with it, and still see the ring without needing to constantly look at the full size of the token. Yeah.
So it seems like, I can't speak for everybody, but it seems like a pretty successful set. You guys really got to put love and care into what it means to have Lord of the Rings in Magic and what every card meant. What is the biggest takeaway going into Universe Beyond sets in the future that you took from this experience?
Well, I want to stress, one of the things about it, not only were we building Lord of the Rings, but this was the first big Universes Beyond set. The reason we started early, and we took this set took longer than most sets took, because it was the first. And there's a lot of great takeaways. Like for example, just the idea of how many copies of characters should we have. We didn't know that. And now we're like, oh, you want multiple. You have your main characters, you need multiple. They have different purposes, so you need, like that we didn't know. We learned that. Or the idea of how to imbue themes into archetypes was really powerful. Oh, white-green is the Hobbits, blue-green is the elves. There's a lot of it's really neat where you can take like draft archetypes and imbue story into. That's very powerful.
Yeah, one of the pieces that this set challenged that we took for granted in previous Universes Beyond work was like that you still needed to make it feel like the highest notes of the story as you're playing with it, which the multiple legends really take into account. We had like the Stranger Things and the Walking Dead and Street Fighter, all those, where it just was these characters really well, and you didn't have to come up with commons. Like it's just the big names. Like we don't even have room for all of them. Whereas Lord of the Rings was the opposite case, where we want to surface the big names in a way and make sure that like as you're playing with the set, you feel like you're playing the Lord of the Rings, not Magic set on Middle Earth. Like those are two different feelings. And the set is kind of trying to point everything towards like, no, it's the Lord of the Rings. Like that's why the ring temperature needs to be like such a linchpin mechanic in the set as well. And other takeaways, like we literally invented documentation during this process of this. Like we showed you a couple of those. Like we never did those for Magic sets. Like that's just stuff that we started doing for Lord of the Rings and have since applied to future Universes Beyond.
Yeah, the knowledge pyramid's become just a thing all Universes Beyond sets do.
Yeah.
Just because one of the things we realized is the idea that different people approach it differently. That some people are like, I love Lord of the Rings, but their knowledge is, a much more base knowledge. Where some people are like, look, I know everything about it, and how do you make both? How do you make all the fans? There's a spectrum of fans, and we want everybody to be happy.
That was actually one of the takeaways. I'm like pretty obsessive just as a person creatively, so I'll get really into whatever I'm working on. So for Lord of the Rings, like I reread the books, I listened to an audiobook, I watched all kinds of content, drove my wife totally insane, and also I joined like every meme Lord of the Rings like Reddit or Instagram or whatever I could find, because I wanted to know what people still love about it, like what's bringing people to the IP, what do they find charming, and so that's how we kind of identified what are some things we can make sure to do that are exciting, like there's a common sword, axe, and bow in the set. There aren't common other things. We have Grand, because he's a really fun Reddit meme. Like we made sure to put him in. He might not have made the cut if I didn't join LOTR memes. Those are the kinds of things that I think it's really easy to underestimate, but like we want to deliver as fans, like ourselves. And so I think that's kind of the challenge for any design lead for Universes Beyond set is like you have to, if you're not already a fan of that IP, which is the ideal case, certainly, you need to immerse yourself in it. And that's something I only was even able to pick up because I'd already had to do it for The Walking Dead and Stranger Things and Transformers and Street Fighter, which I knew something about some of those properties and then nothing about some of them. Like Street Fighter, I couldn't even name some of the characters I designed. But that's what the goal of the design process is to like really familiarize yourself with what you need. And in the Universes Beyond case, that involves delivering something for the fans in a really specific way.
Yeah, I think the thing that this set did that really started is Magic rarities really mean something mechanically, and trying to understand like what is a common expression of something. Like what should be a common, what should be an uncommon, what should be a rare, what should be a mythic rare. Like trying to understand, have that balance. That was really interesting. It's something we hadn't done until we'd done the set. And in some ways, Lord of the Rings, like I feel like there's a lot of things about Lord of the Rings that made it easier for us. Like there's such a world built to Lord of the Rings that Tolkien spent so much time and so much energy. Like the minutia of the world is really known in a way that that's not true. Not every story do you know the worlds in such great detail. And so it was nice starting there, but it's interesting. I mean, we learned a lot, and I mean, I've worked on other UBs since then, and we go back and look at a lot of the stuff we did in this set as sort of the groundwork for how to do other stuff.
So is there anything fun we can expect for future Universe Beyond sets?
I think they'll be fun.
There's a lot of fun stuff, but this is the panel for talking about other UB sets. So.
Well, thank you guys. It looks like we still have a few minutes for anybody that has any additional questions if we didn't cover anything. So feel free to come up, and there's a microphone for you right out there. You can line up, and we'll try to get as many of you as we can before we can wrap this up.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, the mic. We need the mic on.
Do we need the mic on? Yeah.
Might have a switch.
Mic's on.
There you go.
Hello. Thank you. As an old Lord of the Rings fan and a relatively new Magic fan, thank you and congrats on such an incredible set. You mentioned earlier about the partnership with Middle-earth Enterprises. Was there anything that they vetoed or anything that they insisted on putting in? And just like one follow-up for after that, how early on did you decide to put the rules for haste on Shadowfax?
That one was another one of those, somebody mentioned it to me and I was like, this is a great idea. I'm going to see if editing will let me do it. And as a former editor, I knew their ways. So yeah, we were able to get that one on, and there was some debate. Like there were people who were like, this is not funny enough. And I was just like, it so is.
I love it.
But yeah, and for Middle-earth Enterprise, there were various discussions, certainly like things that came back and forth. Not, honestly, like they were incredibly collaborative. Like of all the Universes Beyond brands I've worked with, like I talked with them the most. We really got to know each other, and it was a great experience. One of the ones I feel totally fine sharing was we sent them art for Gandalf at one point, and we got the feedback back that his eyebrows weren't to the brim of his hat, which is very clearly described in the text. And so we were, okay, yeah, we got to lengthen his eyebrows.
Love it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the one thing that we always think is that our partner is the expert in the story in the world, and we're the experts in magic. And so, we really want to go to them and make sure that, hey, are we expressing your characters to the best that we can? And that usually the whole idea is they give us really good feedback to help make sure we're maximizing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
What card from another set do you think would fit really well in the Lord of the Rings set?
Well, that's an interesting question because we actually started the set with a lot of reprints. No, not a lot, but like, 20 to 30 or something like that. Like we were looking for reprints that felt iconic to include. We eventually decided to cut them all, but some of the ones that we had were like, we had Hero's Downfall at Uncommon for Boromir dying. We had Ride Down as the Boros Uncommon, because that's like the most Rohan feeling card Magic's ever printed, probably. So yeah, there were a few of those, but I think Hero's Downfall was like the one, it was, I think, the last one to leave the set because I liked it so much.
Thank you.
With so many battles in the actual Lord of the Rings, what made you decide to not include battles in the actual set?
Well, it was.
Here's the timetable. Lord of the Rings had to start earlier because with licenses, there's a lot more to it. It was the first time we'd ever done a large Universes Beyond. Battles didn't exist. We made battles in March of the Machine, and that it happened later. So I know March of the Machine came out first, but when we were making Lord of the Rings, battles didn't exist. They hadn't been made yet.
There was some debate because like they kind of started to exist late enough that we could have tried to squeeze them in, but honestly they were really complex for March of the Machines even. And deciding to make a set double-sided is also like a whole big wrench to throw into plans. So yeah, we pretty quickly dismissed it, even though we agreed. Sounds like a cool idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, with the battles, we can expect to see those in the future as well, more often. Like the exclusion from the set was simply because they weren't made in time, and they're going to be seen more in the
we
future.
introduced them in March of the Machine. As with anything, let's see what the audience thinks. If the audience really didn't like them, maybe we wouldn't do them again. They've gone over very well, and I can say we're definitely having discussions of where to use them again. So I do think we'll see battles again. They actually went over very well.
Okay, thank you.
When we made Sagas and Dominaria, we didn't have explicit plans to use them again, but
and now Sagas are
where they are now, yeah.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Hello there. I wanted to ask if you're going to make a Universes Beyond set for The Hobbit.
I mean, we had a really good relationship with Middle Earth Enterprises, and we are open to the idea. But you know, I mean, we can't. You know, we don't talk the future, I guess. So.
No scry here.
Yeah. Hope, fingers crossed.
Were there any particular insights or lessons learned from designing such a big Universes Beyond set for not only for like a main set, but for like Jumpstart, Commander, and like Starter Commander decks? Were there any particular like challenges or anything that you lessons learned from that experience?
For me, I think the biggest lesson was like identifying that you could have a really symbiotic relationship with them. For example, I wound up not making the One Ring and equipment, which was a decision that was made easier by knowing that there was the, I believe this is called the starter deck product that has Bilbo's ring as an equipment to like tell that piece of the story. So I was like, okay, there is an expression of that. So if somebody was really tied to it, like they'll get to see the thing that they expected. Very early on, we were kind of dissociated, and then as things kind of moved towards the end, we tightened up and like talked more about, you know, how can we make things work between each of the products? Like, can Hobbits be two power or less everywhere? Like, can we get that done? And I wish we had started out a little bit more in sync together. And like, I think, you know, like meeting every 2 weeks or something like that would have been very productive, for example. And we wound up kind of developing a cadence later on. So that was a takeaway for me.
Thank you.
Hi. So most recent sets were pretty balanced as a limited environment, and this one is clearly like a red-black set. So did you make it more powerful in those colors on purpose? Like in the story, the Sauron is like more powerful than the other the people, and only one ring destroys him, or was it like accident?
I wouldn't call it an accident, but we went through the process that we go through for all the sets. We didn't target explicitly making any color combinations like more or less powerful. We were, to some extent, like we were fine reducing kind of the impact of some color combinations that were less narratively resonant, like red, green, and black, green, because they just don't tie as cleanly into the story tropes. That had the effect of obviously, I think, weakening green a bit more than we wanted, I would suspect. I'm not privy to all of the limited data myself right now, but certainly we wish green had shipped a little bit stronger, and honestly it was winning a lot towards the end of our testing, so I think we just kind of had a confluence of a smaller sample size, specific circumstances around the color being played, and I think one of the things we also maybe underestimated was that Claim the Ring is, or the Ring Tempts You, is both good against and not great in green. Like your creatures tend to have higher power, so you don't want to make them ring bears that often, and lower power gets by your creatures a little more often. So I think we probably maybe should have done a little less Ring Tempts You in green specifically, and just given them a few more stronger cards to kind of counterbalance that. But yeah, that's just how it goes sometimes. Also, for what it's worth, it was also the first booster set I designed, so certainly some of that falls on me.
Okay, thank you.
These will be the last few questions we have, but go ahead and come up.
Hello. This is a simple question regarding art and scene cards. Do you have any plan of making the art more visible on the cards? Because there are a lot of great scenes, and it would be great to the art to be seen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the balance is they're both art pieces and they're game pieces, and so we have to balance between the two. I do know that I believe there are going to be some places where we're going to show the art without the text, so you can appreciate the art by itself. But it's just, we want to make sure you can use them as game pieces, and that's important. So that's the balance. Like, if we make it if we make the art too easy to see, then they become harder to use as game pieces. So.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So thanks for the set, and thanks for including Tom Bombadil on it. And
for sure.
I wanted to ask about this car. So how did you decide for this structure for the cards or for these abilities, and if you had some other design for it.
For Tom Bombadil?
Yeah.
We were all about sagas really early on. Like I've, even other games and some video games, like there's just, clips of, I'm Tom Bombadil. Like, yeah, it's just a really charming character, and singing is like what he's all about. So we wanted him to be about sagas. That's the closest thing in Magic mechanically to singing. And he tells stories, like that's a good vibe for him. He's also like really undefined in like an incredibly powerful sense in the story. That was, we wound up deciding to go with God Bard for his creature type, in part because it was so eye-catching. People were like, really? Like God Bard? And like, yeah, why not? Bard God? Is that better? I don't know.
It makes sense.
Yeah, like I think it plays. It's a valid interpretation. And so yeah, the hexproof and indestructible stuff like that also makes him feel like a god, like the way Magic depicts gods is very durable. We were excited to kind of include that. And then from there, yeah, he's the never-ending song. Like that was the trope that we kind of wanted to execute on with his mechanic, and it was just a matter of figuring out exactly how to do it, and we wound up going with this route.
Thank you.
Like most of the most important characters in Lord of the Rings have a full art. But Sauron and Tom Bombadil doesn't. They only have the ring beer treatment. And why did you choose to not give them a full art?
I didn't hear the second character. I'm sorry. Sauron and
Tom Bombadil.
Oh, Tom Bombadil. Yeah. The real reason is like the full extended art characters just are created mostly by the scenes. So those are two characters that really don't show up in like an iconic scene or a moment that we wound up deciding to depict. We did debate like the Hobbits versus Old Man Willow like being a place we could have done a scene, and that scene could have been a way to include Tom Bombadil. But we ultimately decided it was just not like carrying enough of the set. It was kind of a lesser adventure, so it wound up getting cut for that reason. And then Sauron like being off screen is such a key part of the story that wound up being an element of the scenes that we couldn't quite serve in the same way. Yeah.
About the prints, like in the Lord of the Rings commander decks, you reprint like Scourge of the Throne. Was it because you needed it in the deck, or because you're planning to, I don't know, decrease the price of the cards? You're doing a similar thing with Smothering Tide, printing the same cards in many sets. Smothering Tide this year, I think 3 prints. The same is for Scourge of the Throne.
Do you want to? I'm not sure which card you're saying.
Scourge of the Throne, Dragon for 6 red.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so building commander decks is very, very tricky. We're trying to balance a lot of things. We also want to make the decks themselves balanced and equally appealing. And so sometimes, yeah, we'll dip into the well of a card that will let us do that. And I think that was, ultimately the decision for that particular card.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. So.
Yeah.
It's about reprint choices for commander decks.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues in general for reprints is there's just a larger economy of reprints. There's lots of products to make reprints, and it's where's the best place to put them, and where the best place to use them. And it's not about any one set in a vacuum. It's about sort of making the whole, thinking of all the different things we're doing, bonus sheets and reprint sets and masters, and anyway. So it's a very complicated decision based on lots of vectors. So it's not. It's a very complicated decision. That's all.
Thank you so much for your question. Thank you all for joining us today. Please give a hand to Glenn and Mark. We're going to wrap this up, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your MagicCon.